Go ahead.
The railroad dramatically changed travel in the western North Carolina mountains, and the same was true for the community that's now Old Fort. After the end of the Civil War, when construction of the railroad resumed, the only depot or stopping point for the train east of the Blue Ridge Mountains was here at Henry Station, which is located just off of present-day Mill Creek Road beside the railroad tracks. And passengers who made it as far as Old Fort on the train could only depend on stagecoach or horse travel to get them on across the Blue Ridge to what's now Ridgecrest and on beyond into other points in Buncombe County.
And the idea was to connect east and west by running the railroad from the Raleigh area and down maybe the Charlotte area westward into Asheville. And it was really key because Asheville was a booming area already, but it was for the most part isolated in the section in the mountains where it was located. The state of North Carolina bought the Western North Carolina Railroad for $875,000 and began in earnest to get the railroad all the way through the mountains. And they brought in 500 prisoners to this area here around Old Fort and used those inmates to build the railroad. So we got people working westward, and now we got people working eastward. And on March the 11th, 1879, Wilson, who was still overseeing the railroad project, sent a telegram to Governor Zebulon Vance saying, "Daylight entered Buncombe County today. Grade and center meets exactly." And so that, to me, that's another amazing feat that they could do that by hand with pick and shovel and nitroglycerin to blast. They met in the middle of this tunnel, 1,833 feet long. And so what Wilson wired to Zebulon Vance was what everybody wanted to hear, is that now east met west along the railroad. It amazes me to think that someone could come in here in this area on horseback, ride between the mountains, and figure out how to lay the track. And that was one of the biggest problems they had, was that the grade that they had to take, they had to climb almost 1,100 feet. And so they had to look at the way that a locomotive could pull a load, how much it could handle, what kind of grade it could work on. And one of the things that makes this area unique, this area, what I'm talking about, is between Old Fort and Ridgecrest. One of the things that makes this grade so unique is that they traveled from one point to another with the railroad over 9 miles, about 9.25, 9.5 miles, in order to just travel linearly 3.4 miles, I think it was. And the reason they had to do that, because the locomotive couldn't pull the grade. If they had a load on the train, it was not strong enough to pull a steeper grade, and so they had to do that. And they still kept helper engines in the town of Old Fort. And the railroad still hauls massive amounts of material. And, but during this time period, when you're talking about having to use a wagon and that was pulled by horses to go maybe 20 miles to the closest town to get some limited supplies, then what happened with the railroad is those supplies began to just flood in. This was a vein, this was an artery to the outside world, and yet it was also an artery back to what people wanted in this area. Close by here where we are with the Andrews Geyser here, that fountain started on the grounds of the old Round Knob Hotel. Just behind this fountain that we see behind me was the Round Knob Hotel. The Round Knob Hotel was built here to pull tourists in. They came in by railroads. They wanted as many attractions as they could have. And the people who owned the Round Knob Hotel actually built this fountain, which we now know as Andrews Geyser. And it was, like I said, an added attraction on their grounds. And the grounds being part of their draw, and the mountain air, which was pushed heavily by developers at that time. And already people were seeing the benefits of mountain living and the mountain lifestyle and a visit to the mountains. And so this artery began to bring those people in. They had already come to this point, and that Round Knob Hotel was built before the railroad was ever finished. Or actually, yeah, I guess it was, right, just a couple of years before it was finished. But it started bringing people in, and it also brought people out of the mountains. They had a connection to the outside world, those that wanted it. Then they had access to possibly a better education, a different type of lifestyle if they wanted that. But the railroad had a huge impact, an absolutely huge impact. There's no way that we can actually get the grasp of it today because we're so used to all the highways we have in this country and all the railroads. Then it's hard for us to grasp just what an impact it had.